Hi everybody, I'm Dr. Jenna Condy. I'm a Senior Lecturer in Digital Society at Western Sydney University. And this is a Q&A with Dr. Ben Hankel. And he is a Research Fellow in the Institute of Culture and Society and the Young and Resilient Research Centre, of which I'm also a member. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm sat right now on Darug and Gundungurra land, and I want to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and be really thinking about what it means to be working, living, learning, even digitally on Indigenous land. And today's Q&A is about affordances. I reckon we should just dive straight in. So Ben has been working with the concept of affordances to understand identity, curation, the making of identities in relation to our social media use. So maybe you could start with that and around what that means.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Jenna. So in terms of affordances, I think the way to think about it is when we talk about affordances, we think of things like affordances of visibility, affordances of editability on platforms. And what that really means is thinking about what are the kind of possibilities that users can, be enabled by as they're using platforms, or constrained by. So we're kind of talking about the enabling features and constraining features of platforms and what becomes possible. And when we talk about platforms, we're talking about things like Facebook, like TikTok, like Instagram. And when we talk about things like affordances of visibility, for instance, we're talking about how they make things visible. So they have search bars, for instance, on Facebook. They have profiles which you can go and find, and that allows your profile and information about you and others to be shared and visible, and to afford, as we say, a visibility on platforms. I think what's particularly interesting about that is that what you can do then is you can edit and you can change up your profile and your privacy settings, which allow different levels of visibility depending on your participation on platforms. So you can kind of curate we call it kind of curating your identity around the affordances, and by that I mean the possibilities of platforms.
Right, okay, so if I'm thinking about my social media use, it might be shaped by the affordances that the platforms are giving me. And if I want to change my social media use and change what I want to do with it, then I could be looking at the platforms differently.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. And so maybe it's about thinking about, well, what is the platform allowing me to do? And so if I think about that, for instance, if we think about activism and advocacy, which we talk about a lot in this particular pod, or this particular curiosity pod, what we're thinking about then is we're thinking about, well, what might an affordance of visibility, for instance, allow us to do? It might be able to be that we can kind of share content and reach more people through particular actions on a platform, for instance.
So it's a quite a useful concept then, and it's proving quite popular with internet researchers as a way of understanding what we are doing with social media. So you've written an article that uses the concept of affordances that's about LGBTQI plus young people's identity formation. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So what I did, I went and with a group of researchers, we went and asked LGBTIQ plus young people how they were using social media platforms, and specifically how they were using or engaging with the affordances of those platforms. And when I'm talking about affordances here, I'm talking about affordances of things like affordances of visibility, affordance of privacy, and how they were negotiating their participation in social media spaces like Facebook and Instagram. And if you think about places like Facebook, often this is where, and we've spoken about this in previous lectures, this is where context collapse, which means that when you talk about information or present information about yourself, often it can be seen by your friends, your family, your work colleagues, so multiple people can see that content and the context collapse around it. And part of the affordance of visibility is that it is positioned in such a way, platforms like Facebook, that multiple audiences can see that content, and enhances your ability to be visible and seen by others. What we were asking young people, these LGBTIQ plus young people, who are often marginalized, who face stigma, who face discrimination, how they negotiate those contexts collapsing in online spaces, and what are the types of features they use to be able to negotiate that issue. And so what we found in our study is the young people were using features such as like unfriending, blocking people, selectively setting up their friendship list about who could see content, so that they were using kind of, I guess, the affordances of visibility, editability, and privacy to negotiate and ensure that that when they were talking about LGBT content, or talking to friends about queer issues, that wasn't visible to others, so they felt protected and able to be engaged in a safe, supportive space where they could talk to others online about that.
Yeah, so that's a really key example, I think, to be thinking through the sort of what's being enabled and what's being constrained, and it's sort of managing different audiences, I guess. So you mentioned the context collapse concept, which we've kind of touched on briefly before. From your research, is it just a case of the young people were playing around with the features of social media platforms to be able to be themselves, or were they then maybe self-censoring or as well?
Yeah, so a bit of all of the above. So I think what's particularly interesting is, I guess with affordances, you have to remember that whilst there is the affordance of visibility or the affordance of privacy, for instance, the structural affordances of platforms, not everyone necessarily knows about all the features that enable or constrain those things. So people use them according to what tools that they understand are within a particular platform. So for instance, on Facebook, people might be selectively choosing what information to share on more public spaces, where they might share everything with friends and family, whereas it might be with more select groups. And through actually what we found was particularly the direct message feature, they were kind of bringing groups of friends together and building up supportive networks in those spaces, and then talking to broader networks afterwards, where they would then have those supportive groups who could then be with them and support them when talking about more publicly about queer related issues in the more public settings.
Yeah, so a bit of a backup.
Yeah, that's a good way. A good way to think about it.
Yeah, and a safe space to talk about things, work out your issues, and then maybe go a bit more public with some of your perspectives or advocacies, issues, things like that.
No. But I guess one thing probably to make note of too is that whilst this curation was kind of taking place, it didn't kind of prevent all issues from being addressed necessarily. So that because of the visibility of content, it often they would see homophobic or transphobic content sometimes enter their feeds, or if they spoke about and were vocal about a particular issue, some people might call them out about their sexuality or diverse gender identity when they weren't ready to talk about it, which kind of implicated them because of the context that have collapsed. That implicated them and made them have to respond or do something about that particular post. So they felt exposed in those particular ways, and had to negotiate and navigate that and curate identities around those, I guess, moments when using platforms that expose them in particular ways.
Yeah. So one of the final question that I've got was around, given the platforms that we've got, what does the future look like for our identity formation and who we can be in our community building?
It's a really great question. I guess I would say one thing to think about is not for ourselves. What are the affordances of platforms? How can we kind of use the features, the things that allow us to do things, the things that might not allow us to do things? How can we reflect on those critically and think about what's possible and not possible? But perhaps the more interesting question here would be actually thinking about, well, what are the people who we want to reach? If there is this kind of affordance of visibility, and this is across platforms, so you can think about Instagram. When you share something, you might use a hashtag to increase visibility of content. If we want to reach particular groups, particular communities, who is actually seeing that information and where is it going to, and how might they then be recurating that content within their own spaces? through the engagements they're participating in relation to social media as well.
Yeah, finding your people and galvanizing support. I guess that might link in with Teresa's talk from last week around networked publics and networked capabilities as well. There's something for us to think about. Thanks very much, Ben. That's really amazing.
Great. Thank you.